there have been a couple of situations where we've alluded to storytelling, and now storytelling is a thing. It wasn't for the longest time. For a long time in education, they were saying, I don't want to, administrators were saying, I don't want to see any professors in front of the classroom. I want to see all of the students doing activities during class. It's called the flipped classroom, where the students did readings and maybe watched videos before class and came to class knowing the information, and then they would have discussions or do activities. That's not a lot of professors' natural teaching style. And in nutrition, it's a little bit hard to do because there's so much misinformation. Do you want undergraduates in intro to nutrition teaching themselves and coming to class and discussing in small groups? Okay. A lot of them may not do the readings. I mean, I will admit that in graduate school, there are some times in journal club that I didn't have time to read the whole article. Yeah. And pretty much anyone who says they always came prepared to having the assigned readings done before class isn't telling the truth. Okay. So, that era is kind of over with the flipped classroom. It works sometimes and for some things and for some classes. But they're finding it wasn't as effective in real life as it was in theory. Okay, because you can't count on really busy people to read the chapter before they get to class. Okay. So, it was hard for me because my natural style has always been storytelling. And, I like, I feel like I'm not doing my job. I went to grad school for 6 years full time. And I felt like, if students are just teaching themselves, what is my role? To just stand there and watch them in their small groups discuss things? So anyway, it didn't really take off. For problem-based learning was a thing for a while, where they thought you could just give students a series of case studies throughout the semester that they would do together and in class, that the professor didn't need to be in front of class explaining anything. I went to grad school with a guy who was ended up being medical education director at a medical school, St. George's University in Grenada. And he went to all problem-based education, problem-based learning. And what happened was the medical school graduates failed their board exams because they didn't have enough information. Sometimes you just have to, when I was told about this, I'm like, how are the students going to learn about all these different diseases? I can't make case studies that encompass all of the terms and all of the medications and all of the different disease states. And they're like, oh, yeah, you can. And so I just didn't. But that's what happened. What he had to do was allow the students to come back for free for a summer where they did like intensive learning of just material by rote memorization and things like that. So anyway, storytelling is part of a lecture. More data is coming out about how it works and its effectiveness. I will tell you the BCAL grant, what we did originally 4 years ago, our first of 4 attempts at submitting, storytelling was what was going to make it innovative. And the reviewers did not like it. They're like, storytelling is, kind of fluffy. Why are you using that as a vehicle? And even this last attempt, there's one reviewer said, well, there's no evidence that this is effective for learning or changing attitudes. And we had to let him know gently and respectfully that we referenced the literature that supported storytelling. So when I was evaluated by another faculty at Cal Poly, I was teaching MNT, and he was one of those Spock-like advanced nutrition professors. And he said, why is she telling all these stories? They need the information, you know? And he taught metabolism, which it's hard to make stories about glycolysis, you know? So it just wasn't in his wheelhouse. Okay. So I want you to think about your most vivid memory from growing up. One of your most vivid memories. Was it attached to some type of I hope you thought something happy. Was it attached to some type of emotion? Were you feeling something that day? Or was it a mundane day, a mundane memory? It was probably something attached to an emotion. And you remember things better if they're attached to some type of emotion. And there's a neurobiological basis of that. Now, one of the things that we tried to do to convince the reviewers is instead of using storytelling, we made sure that storytelling, also called narrative or narration, but that sounded weird, so I like storytelling. When it comes to learning, you can call it narrative learning. In dietetic practice or medical practice, you can call it narrative practice. It's the same thing because a story is some type of narration. Where I got, well, I guess I could call it listening to patient narratives, but when you're eliciting a story or a narrative, I guess, from a patient, that's where I like storytelling better. So if you're ever talking about storytelling to people who don't really know that much about it, and you think they might think it's fluffy, you can use narration instead. If you want to do a paper or look up research on storytelling, I always put in storytelling and narrative. Okay. Because some articles are titled narrative practice. Okay, so storytelling is a way that information is passed down from generation to generation. And, they say it's the way wisdom of the ages is passed down. That's what mythology is. All of those myths, in those myths, they embed a lot of symbolism and metaphor. And it's a way to impart not just information from generation to generation, but also values and attitudes and things like that. Have any of y'all heard of Joseph Campbell? He's a psychologist, I think, really into mythology. He wrote A Hero's Journey. I'm not sure if he wrote it or if he talks about it a lot. He's dead now. But you see A Hero's Journey attached to his name a lot. That is a book that is like the example of storytelling, how to develop and create a story and character and things like that. So there are certain cultures, when you think about certain cultures, you may think about storytelling more often. In the Hispanic culture, storytelling is a common form of communication. Okay. Native American as well. So there's different ways that stories can be conveyed. Back before the written word, pictures on caves, oral storytelling, written word, books and written narratives, and visual media. Visual media includes things like movies. Okay. And I want you to do something in a second about that. Okay. Now, this is written by Anita Johnson, Eating in the Light of the Moon. She's a psychologist. She lives in Boulder now. She's one of the 3 eating disorder experts I did a lot of training under. They would do their trainings in remote areas to so that where there wasn't TV or media or even internet. Now they had to have they did have places that people with like kids could go so that they could keep in touch with their families or in case of a family emergency. If I'm single and have no one, I got to completely unplug while I was there. And I actually would recommend, I haven't been able to do it in a while and I really need to do this. I highly recommend that people go somewhere where they can completely unplug and be kind of immersed in nature. Doesn't have to be like in Maui or Orcas Island, where they had these week-long retreats for counselors and dietitians. But that it really does help your mental health. And you'd be shocked at how hard it is when you come back to the real world of how bombarded you are with sights, sounds, and all sorts of media. But anyway, what Anita uses myths in this book. And when you're reading a myth, you become immersed in the characters, but it somehow reaches your subconscious. The metaphors and the symbolism reaches you at a subconscious level. This, a lot of people have said that this book has really helped them when it comes to body image and eating issues. Okay. A lot of people said it was a transformative book for them. And it is really good. I have a copy of it. So one of the stories that is in the book, and she has a video. She's a really good storyteller. In these trainings, she would pick for the week-long training that we went through. In the evenings, our session was going through a myth that she picked out that had a certain message, and we would talk about the meaning of the myth, and she would give a segment of the story or of the myth every night. But one of the stories in this book that I really liked goes something like this, and she's really dramatic. She has that actor voice when she tells it. But here's one of the stories. So, let's see. You're out at by this river, and it's a really hot day, and the river's really calm. So you decide to take a dip in the river and start swimming. So you're swimming down the river, and all of a sudden, you encounter some rapids, and you feel like you might not make it. But a log passes by, and you grab onto the log, and you're hanging onto the log, and that saved you from drowning. But then the water became calm again, but you couldn't let go of the log because you're afraid to, because you almost drowned before in that water. There were people at the bank saying, let go of the log and swim to shore. And you really needed to get to shore, to get on with your life. Because who wants to be, in the river overnight? So, but you can't. And so, someone says, well, just let go for a little bit. So you let go and then you grab back on. And then you let go and you swim around the log once and you grab back on. And then you swim out a little bit farther, but swim right back to the log and grab onto it. But each time you let go and go a little bit further, that's practice. And eventually you get to where you can let go of the log and swim to shore. So, what does the turbulent water represent? Fear. It represents chaos. Okay. Trauma. And what does a log represent? Comfort, safety. Yeah, it was like your life preserver. And it served you well when you're in those turbulent waters trying to survive. But then when the water became calm again, you hung onto that log and couldn't let go. So she's, an eating disorder expert. So she said, the log is like your eating disorder. When you're going through all this trauma in your life, the way you coped was with food. And so recovery, gotta let go of the log, the thing that kept you afloat and saved you from drowning. It may take practice. It may take many attempts, but with the support of the people on the shore, and that type of thing, you're learning the skills and eventually you become comfortable enough to let go of the log. Okay. So when I read that, I had always, even after, I improved my lifestyle and eating behaviors, I still felt a lot of shame about that. And Bob Greene, Oprah's trainer, said she was the same way. She would lose a lot of weight, but she never let go of that shame of having been overweight. And when I read that story, I was like, oh, I was doing the best I could, to get through difficult times. And so it really helped me come to peace with some of that. So, storytelling, even watching movies, it's not just entertainment. Telling stories as part of a lesson is not just a way to break up lecture, which is another comment I got. Another professor who was reading my evaluation was trying to support me and saying, oh, but storytelling is a great way to break up lecture. I'm like, no, it's actually a teaching technique. But it's a strategy that can improve memory or enhance learning, can influence attitude, increases empathy, and it can create a sense of connection. So storytelling can be used to help people learn and influence values, behavior, that type of thing. So listening to a story is, more enjoyable than listening to just facts and dry information, right? Okay. So it's an enjoyable experience. I mean, who likes to go to a good movie? That's a story. Okay. That's fun. So storytelling in a learning situation is, nutrition educators can affect the cognitive domain, which is memory, and knowledge. The affective domain is attitudes, and then the behavioral domain, changing behaviors. Okay. The research is showing that it's actually more effective than a lot of other teaching methods in affecting all three areas. Okay. One of the things that Brene Brown says, and she's a storyteller, did y'all watch her video? It's in the, it's linked in the introduction to this module page. She's a storyteller, and I want you to watch her video. It's her viral video on the power of vulnerability, because she uses stories, and I want you to see how effectively she uses stories to make a big impact. I mean, I think that video has over 250 million views now. So it was really effective, and she used storytelling in it. One of the things she says is how-to instructions don't really work well for changing behavior. And that's really applicable to nutrition. Does a diet instruction telling people what to do or how to do it, does that really change attitudes and behaviors? Okay. So you thought of your vivid childhood memory. Now think about that versus the name of the nucleotide bases you learned in biology. That wasn't very memorable, was it? Thymine, blah, blah, cytosine, blah, blah. Yeah, uracil. Yeah, that's one of them. Yeah.
It's on adenosine.
Adenosine.
Yeah.
So it did come back to some of y'all. But it's like the steps in the Krebs cycle. How many classes did I have to memorize that for? I can visualize the cycle and some hydrogens popping off and some carbon dioxide somewhere. But, you know, I just have a vague after many, many, many times. Okay, so here we go. Aspartame is an artificial sweetener that loses its sweetness when exposed to heat. Okay, so we teach us an intro to nutrition. So a couple weeks after we talk about artificial sweeteners, they have their exam on carbohydrates. And the question is, which of the artificial sweeteners loses its sweetening ability when exposed to heat? Okay. There's all these artificial sweeteners that we went over. And it was, you know, the Charlie Brown lecture, wah, 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 you know, this one, that one. You know, this is what it's made of. This is the foods that it's put in, blah, blah, blah. So how likely is an intro to nutrition student to remember that versus the other ones? Well, here's my diet soda story. So, you know, I grew up in Texas. Okay. It gets really hot in Texas. And, you know, we always had diet soda, those 2-liter plastic bottles. And we had a detached garage, and my mom stored them in the garage. You know, I know exactly where they are. You go inside the garage door, and they were right there on the garage door floor. So in the summers, it gets up above 105, between 105 and 110 for at least several weeks in the summer. But, you know, it's really, really hot. It gets in the 90s, sometimes in May, definitely by June. Well, Diet Coke is sweetened with aspartame. Okay. So, you know, think about a really, really hot day and how good an ice cold Coke would taste. And, you know, I mean, you can even anticipate because, you know, you get the soda bottle, you have your glass of ice, and you open the soda bottle and you hear that, and that sets up even more anticipation. You pour the Coke, Diet Coke in the glass and you taste it. There's just artificial sweetener with no artificial flavorings. that don't taste very good. So, that was the problem with this artificial sweetener, aspartame, being exposed to the heat. So your diet soda, if it's, most of them are made with aspartame, some of them have a sulfite K added as well. But that's why you don't want to store them in something hot. The other thing I think about all those years is that high heat and an acidic beverage leaching all the plastic.
That's when I first saw this.
I don't want anyone to biopsy any of my tissues and look under the microscope ever. So, how this works is the amygdala is this little ball, okay? And the amygdala is kind of like an emotions processing center of the brain. And the hippocampus is right there. There's connections between the amygdala and the hippocampus. The hippocampus processes and stores memories. That's why when you experience an emotion, the amygdala acts to help you encode those memories in the hippocampus. So when you're teaching, if you can ever evoke an emotion and associate an emotion with information, it will be remembered better. Even gets in the long-term memory better. Okay. Oh, did y'all see that? Oh man. So yeah, I'll never forget that movie. I can't remember why I put this up.
Oh, it's emotions.
But I remember, I remembered, what happened really, really well because strong emotions um, were evoked. So you learn about the complexities of human interaction when you listen or watch a story. You become immersed in the characters of the story. Have y'all ever cried? Well, I cried in this. Have y'all ever cried watching a movie?
So many times.
And you don't even realize you're kind of having an out of body experience. You're not yourself. You're feeling what that character is feeling. You feel happiness too. Did you cheer for Forrest Gump? Were you happy for him? So think about, when the underdog wins, you feel that. Okay. So, stories can be a way to get people to think about cultural norms, values, things like that. Now, one of the things that we justify about using storytelling is when you become immersed in a character, you identify and develop an empathy for what they're going through. And that's a good way to challenge biases, even implicit biases, because you're experiencing what the character is experiencing. Okay. In addition to making information seem more believable, because I can tell you stories about what my patients went through. So the information is more believable. I remember one time in a class for minors, I said something about you can't shame a person into changing their behavior, and I got eye rolls. And then I was able to share some of my patient experiences with them about how they were shamed by a healthcare professional and never went back, or shamed in an appointment and on the way home went through the McDonald's drive-through, so the shaming had the opposite effect. Let's see. I already told you the story about my patient with diabetes at the San Antonio clinic. Okay, do you remember that story? Okay, And,
Your colleagues. Or, I guess, if not empathetic ones in the room.
yeah, yeah. It was like, you really should be drinking water. Are you ever going to tell that to a patient? Okay, so that story affected maybe your attitude and your behavior as a future nutrition counselor. Okay, because hopefully I don't think I said it in my really compelling way, but hopefully you felt, his shame when he hung his head down and was, had all these people around him. Okay, so what happens when you listen to other people's stories? Like, say you have a client or somebody you don't know and you're listening to their story. How do you think they feel when you're listening to their story with interest, compassion, empathy? They feel empowered and it fosters a sense of connection. So, think about, you as a dietitian, there's probably a lot of people who come to you and are intimidated. Okay. So you ask them about them and it makes them feel like you care. Okay. It develops that connection. Okay. When somebody experiences somebody listening to their story with compassion and empathy, oxytocin is released. That's that bonding neurochemical. Okay. Um, the other thing that's really important about listening to stories, a lot of times, okay, I had this client coming in, and they have, type 2 diabetes. I need to go in and give them, their meal plan and explain carb counting. But I don't know anything about them. Okay. Um, or their circumstances or what I can do to best help them. Okay. And you might miss information. Okay. Do you want me to tell a story that I told at the obesity interventions in their weight bias section that shows how harmful it is not to listen to a patient? Okay. So it's the last session of the end of 2 days. And, it was the first time I presented. And, I'd gone to one where I was just observing and I saw how bored and tired everyone was at this last session, where they just were up talking about weight bias. And then they did some type of role play or something on the stage. And it was in Dallas, so I know that people who live there are really polite when they do evaluations because that's the culture. They're not gonna like hammer anyone. So I'm like, oh, you can take a risk here. So I got up and I said, I want to tell you about someone I know who experienced weight bias in healthcare. So this person, when they were in high school, they were on the tennis team. And their junior year, they had the one of those bad flus that was going around, and it was followed by an opportunistic pneumonia, and they never really got their energy back. They couldn't rejoin the team. They're just fatigued all the time. And this person gained a lot of weight because they weren't as active and they're tired all the time. And it's kind of like they were put in slow motion for a while. And so they went to college, they were gaining weight and were really distressed about it. So they decided to major in dietetics to find the solution to their weight problem. So, they majored in dietetics, became a dietitian, still continued to gain weight slowly, but continued to gain weight, started going on really punishing diets, because it's really hard being a dietitian in a larger body. So they go on these diets wanting to lose weight really quickly, so that they would be acceptable. Well, this person continued on to grad school, full-time grad school, for 6 years and continued to gain weight. By the time that they finished graduate school, they're 30 years old and weighed about 250 pounds. Went on a diet called OptiFast, or 475 calories a day of shakes. Lost 75 pounds, didn't eat a single thing for 14 weeks, but then started gaining it right back. And she kept, every doctor she went to gave her 800 calorie exchange diet, 1200 calorie exchange diet. She would go to, an appointment, and a nurse one time said, "Why don't you just push yourself away from the table?" Got comments like, "How can you be a dietitian at that size?" In fact, in undergrad, when she was gaining weight, her advisor called her in and said, "You'll never get a job. You need to count calories." She was demeaned by healthcare professionals about her lack of willpower. Was really shamed. Then when she was about 36, her periods got really, really, really heavy, and then nonstop. She had to carry like several pairs of black pants with her in her car, because it didn't matter what product she was using, she would bleed through at inopportune times as well. So, she went to her doctor about it. They did blood work, and yeah, she was anemic from the blood loss. So they told her to take iron supplements, and they put her on triple dose birth control pills because that usually controls menstrual bleeding, and it didn't. So they referred her to a gynecologist who put her on progesterone. And with her background, she said, "Couldn't I have thyroid disease? Couldn't this be thyroid disease? My sister and my aunt had it." And, they kind of rolled their eyes and said, "You just need to lose weight." And so the progesterone increases the appetite. So she was on it for a couple of weeks, gained weight. The bleeding stopped, but as soon as she stopped the progesterone, the bleeding came back again. So I put her on progesterone again and stopped the bleeding, but just temporarily. Her hemoglobin was dropping this whole time. So she decided to go to an endocrinologist, and she thought, well, maybe a female endocrinologist would be more receptive. So she took off a half day from her clinical dietitian job and went to this endocrinology appointment. And, she told, the endocrinologist asked her about the situation, and I said, she said, "I'm just so tired." And the endocrinologist, and she said, "Could this be thyroid?" Which is why she went to the endocrinologist. The endocrinologist rolled her eyes and went, "You think you have a glandular problem?" The air quotes always come out with glandular problems. And I said, "Well, yeah, my sister and my aunt." And she said, "You just need to exercise more and lose weight." Didn't order any blood work. So, the gynecologist, she went back to the gynecologist. She sent her in for a transvaginal ultrasound to see if there was something going on that the ultrasound could detect. Nope. So he decided to do a D&C because that will stop bleeding. So her sister took her to the procedure, and the sister was a petite, beautiful, blue-eyed blonde. So the patient was in the bed, before being wheeled to surgery, and introduced her sister to the gynecologist because she was sitting in the corner room. The gynecologist turned his attention to the sister. I know you from somewhere. Don't I know you from somewhere? No. And this is about the patient. Well, do you have any questions? I know you from somewhere. And as he was shutting the door, leaving the room, I know you. So, the patient goes in for the DNC and wakes up halfway through of the anesthesia. And they just said, we're almost done. So, she went home. Her sister took her home. And the sister said, when the gynecologist came out, he said, again, I know you from somewhere, and said, this just happens to large women sometimes. And the gynecologist told the patient, if the bleeding comes back, you're going to have a hysterectomy. So eventually, and he said, if your hemoglobin goes, it's 9.1 now, it goes below 9, we'll have to have a hysterectomy. So she moves to a different state, and she goes into the new doctor because the bleeding came back, and one of her coworkers told her who their doctor was. And, the doctor comes in and she's like, okay, he's going to berate me for my weight again and tell me to exercise and eat less. And, the patient says, I'm just so tired. And she starts kind of tearing up. And the doctor says, we're going to figure this out. And so he ordered some blood work, and he called her 2 days later and said, your TSH is 88, the highest I've ever seen. You have severe hypothyroidism that's been going on a very, very, very long time. So he put her on a low-dose birth control pill and thyroid meds, and the bleeding stopped and was regular ever after. Okay. And that was me, to make it more dramatic. So I told that story, and I'm like, because we're supposed to go by a script. And the psychologist afterwards said that made a bigger impact than if you had done it the way it was scripted. And it was the story. In the evaluations, the people who attended all talked about that. There were some people in the audience who were dietitians in larger bodies who came up and said, wow, I never thought anyone else experienced things like that. So it really worked. And then I got in trouble for not following the script. And now there's like in our contract, you have to follow the script. But taking a chance like that, and that's why I want you to take risks. And, when you're teaching classes or trying to come up with strategies, because sometimes they really pay off. It's scary as hell when you do, because sometimes when you take a risk, it flops. But sometimes those are the things that get you to the next level. Okay, so storytelling can change attitudes, and that's because, when you're listening to a story, you suspend your current beliefs. Again, think about being in a really good movie that you're immersed in, or a book that you're reading that you're immersed in. You're suspending, your current reality when you're watching a really good movie or reading a really good book. Well, when your attitudes are suspended, that's the time where new attitudes can be slipped in the form of a story. And so, I don't know how many of y'all remember the 2008 election cycle. Who remembers the story of Joe the plumber? That might have been too long ago for people who were younger. But that was a story. Poor Joe the plumber. with the economy, he's having so much trouble. Everyone felt sorry for Joe the plumber, who's making well over 200,000 a year. He should have been the poor dietitian. But anyway, I mean, that politician was using storytelling to make to get people to shift their attitudes away from the other candidate who didn't care as much about Joe the plumber. Okay. Okay, the empathy, this is really important, and this is one of the reasons narrative teaching is kind of important for healthcare professionals who don't understand what patients may be going through because they haven't been through it. Because you identify with the characters of a story, you kind of feel their emotions and you develop empathy. The neurobiological mechanism is mirroring. When one person feels something, you tend to feel that by the process of mirroring. So there's one study on narrative learning at medical school. So they use storytelling when they were teaching. And at the end of this series of lessons where they use storytelling, the students evaluated. And there were some that did not like it at all. You're wasting time. I want to know the information, and that's all I want to know, and I want to get out. Okay. So it's not for everyone. Some people, just want the teacher to give them information. So it's not for everyone. Okay, so the person who's telling the story, it can be really empowering to them if the story is, received with empathy and compassion. But what happens when someone's listening to a story? Well, one of the things that can happen, and it's courageous to tell your story, but there may be someone in the audience who's like, I thought it was just me, but now I know it's not. So it can help people in that way, so that the listener knows that they're not alone in their experience. Now, there is a risk in telling your story. You're being vulnerable. So what Brene Brown says is tell your story to people who have earned the right to hear it. Now, I didn't know if those people at that workshop had earned the right, and some of them probably didn't earn the right to hear it. And they may have judged me harshly for that story. You don't know. So that there is risk in telling your story. You need to figure out when to edit yourself or, have a boundary. Because some people don't deserve to hear your story and they may use that information against you. Yeah, it sucks that people are like that. Okay, so in dietetic practice, listening to someone's story, your patient's story can create the connection. You can get a better understanding of their experience, and they may reveal some information that they didn't think about telling you in their intake form that you're like, oh, shoot. One of my former students had anorexia nervosa, and she was doing pretty well in recovery, and she'd always been able to control her weight, but she started gaining weight and none of her tricks were working. So she went to her dietitian. It was the dietitian who was listening to her and listening to, her talk about her energy level and how she was cold all the time, and realized she could have a thyroid problem, and she did. So it's the dietitian listening to her that picked that up. Stories can help people move along the stages of change from pre-contemplation to contemplation. Okay, this is more so than one-on-one, it can be used. But when you're talking and doing a talk in front of a big audience and you tell a story and someone in the audience may be in pre-contemplation and the story of this person may help change their attitude so that they go from pre-contemplation to contemplation. And then from contemplation to preparation, mixed in with the social learning theory, if you tell a story of somebody who's been really successful, this helps deal with relapse too. So telling stories can move people along those stages of changes. Stories can be used to inspire, and stories can be used to get people to think about something they may not have been thinking about. In nutrition education, it helps you connect with the audience. Okay. And it can, facilitate attitude change among the people you're educating, makes information more memorable, like we talked about. In a nutrition ed class, it could get someone in pre-contemplation to start thinking about change, and it can make a presentation easier to listen to. Okay, I think we need a break. I need to get something to drink. So let's take a break now. And there's something dealing with end of fiscal year budget that I need to take care of. So let's take a short break and come back in about 5 to 10 minutes. I don't know how to get to the menu thingy. In Zoom, it pops down. I don't see anything that's letting me pause. So the people watching this are just going to have to fast forward through it. Okay, I'll be right back.
It is. Oh, so you can just automatically does it on Teams because when I hit record yesterday. More interesting writing. Two.
Oh, I thought it was transcribing you.
I thought it was two, wasn't it? Oh, it is.
I know, well, she said me a few times.
Oh, did she?
I know she did, or I.
Good catch.
Yeah, thanks.
So that lady ever emailed me back. So I don't know if I should just wait a little bit more.
Are you talking to me?
Yeah.
Oh, about the health
Yeah, about
literacy
the
thing?
tool, yeah, because when did I
I know, I was thinking, I was like, what do we do?
no, literally.
What do we do?
I emailed it the 24th, and that was a little over a week ago. It was last Tuesday.
Yeah, I was thinking, I was like, how long is it gonna take them to respond? Yeah, I think we have to come up with like an alternative. I found another one. It was more like health literacy, not so much nutrition, you know?
Okay.
But yeah, and it was in Spanish, so I could understand some of it, but it was like, it would say something that would have two words and you had.
Oh, share. And stop sharing. Need to get my PowerPoint up front and center. Okay, we're going to talk more about advocacy next week or the week after. So I'm not gonna go over this in a lot of detail. But when you're trying to advocate for yourself or your employees to upper management, or you're trying to do some advocacy work about policy, which is really important right now in nutrition. Part of the steps in advocacy is storytelling. Because you're trying to make a case for why what you want or need is important. Okay, so this is something, and I want your opinion on this. As a nutrition counselor or a nutrition educator, how much should you reveal about yourself?
I'm the complete opposite, I think.
Yeah, no, I think, I'm an over revealer.
I don't.
No, I thought it was like I was losing my filters, but I think that's just some people are revealers, you know? So this is something we talk about with CDR, and some are like, no, it's not professional. You hold that boundary. And some people are like, well, it helps you if you tell a little bit about yourself, it helps the client or audience see that you're more human.
That's why I'll do it. Like, if I'm just trying to relate to someone, I'll just give a little tidbit on it, like, oh, I can understand how I think of that. But
Mhm.
that can be convinced.
Yeah, I think I think I posted it. There's a reading in Harvard Review or something like that about storytelling. And it's about someone who was, I guess the guy was teaching, and at the end of the lecture, he revealed, just said something personal. It wasn't about the lecture or anything, but something about his dogs or something in his personal life. And the students really connected with that. So it can be useful that way. But when you're in a counseling situation, you have to remember it's not about you. Okay, it's about the client. And sometimes if a patient is in a much larger body and I can tell they're feeling shame around me, I say, hey, I used to weigh 260 pounds. And, that's an instant bond. The next question is, how do you lose the weight? And that's what I don't reveal. I said, well, I found the path for me, and, we're going to discover the path for you because it's different for everyone. So that's the thing. You need to be really intentional or aware of not making the session about you. So that's something that we grapple with, in the obesity interventions, and we do bring it up. And there's no right answer to that. Some of it has to do with your own comfort level. Yeah.
So then what about as an obese or as a person who is obese, right? Like if they're coming to, let's say, a dietitian that has is thin or something, would they have a perception entering that situation as well, right? Correct.
Absolutely. And someone at our workshop asked that, they were in a larger body, and they said, well, what do I say, if anything, to people? Because I know that a lot of them are thinking, you don't know what you're doing. And what I said is, as a dietitian, there's no win. If you're really lean and athletic, they'll assume that you don't understand. And if you're in a larger body, they'll think, well, what does she know?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Thank you.
So there's no win, but Cindy Dormer, the way she handles it is, I don't know what it's like to be in a much larger body, but I have worked with a lot of people in larger bodies, and I've learned so much from them. Okay. That's something, you do need to know. I mean, I was there. I mean, I would go into doctor's office and I would, see a female doctor who is really thin. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
that's my first reaction. So that is something really common. So you can address that, pretty shortly. after you start working with them.
That report, I guess.
Yeah, the building a rapport. And someone said, like if you're a dietitian in a larger body, I am a person in a larger body. Do you have any questions for me about that? And if you're in a smaller body, you can say, a lot of my clients have said, they think I don't understand what they're going through because I have never been in a larger body, and you can introduce it that way and just reassure them. And then some clients may decide that you're not a good fit for them. They may not want to work with a dietitian in a larger body, and that's, their choice. But yeah, there is no win. Okay, so it's true even socially when people ask you what you do. Okay, so you're gonna elicit your client stories, and some of their stories may include trauma. And so you need to do this really sensitively and know that they don't have to tell you everything. And you can reassure them that if they're talking about something that could be uncomfortable, that it's up to you how much they want to reveal and if they're ready to reveal that. I was working with a client who she lost 50 pounds and then she got stuck, and she goes, "This is where I always bounce back up." And I said, "Well, what's going on?" And I said, "Do you see any themes around it?" And she was like, "Well, actually, it's when I start getting male attention." And it turns out that she had been sexually abused by a healthcare provider. So that's beyond my scope. And so I said, the symptoms you're describing, like this sense of panic, and some other stuff, it sounds a lot like PTSD. And so I said, EMDR has been really effective for some people for PTSD. So she found a counselor who did PTSD, and she worked through that. So that's what's important about listening to their story. She hadn't been ready to tell me, or she hadn't thought about that as part of the process before. But when you elicit the story, it helps build trust and connection, and it can reveal the barriers, beliefs, and motivators for the behavior. And it puts the patient in the driver's seat when they're telling their story. When you're listening, if it's someone with a different cultural identity, and you're listening to their story with curiosity, that breaks down some barriers as well. It makes them take some pride in their cultural identity. So it can really help you develop personalized, individualized care. So as far as how you elicit the story, your client may fear judgment. It could elicit some emotions that are too distressing. So they have to be ready to reveal certain things. And you as a dietitian, you need to be prepared to deal with stuff that might come up and have your referral sources ready. So as far as the process of eliciting a story, you create that safe space, or what Tanya Greathouse just said, a brave space of belonging, a supportive environment that's free from distractions and private, where you're fully present, not distracted. And instead of asking them questions, let them lead and open up as they feel comfortable. there is a tendency for a lot of us to want to jump in and fix things or give advice, and that's not recommended. Here are some things that you can lead with to help them to tell their story. And, you'll do some probing, follow what they say with more open-ended questions to kind of encourage or facilitate the story. You'll use your MI reflective listening. And then, if they pause or if they, lose eye contact, some of those types of body language things, then, you can explore that. I noticed that you just paused what was going through your mind. Would you like to tell me about that? And don't push them, to say things. You can say we can come back to that if and when you feel more comfortable. And then, don't just say, oops, time's up, need to kick you out. A few minutes before this session ends, ask them if there's anything else they'd like to add, and then thank them for telling their story. Okay, something that is important about groups when people are sharing, if you have kind of like a support group, you need to set the ground rules for the group as a safe space where you don't share outside of the group, that everyone needs to be respectful. Everyone needs to give other people a turn. In some groups, there's someone who will just dominate. You can model some vulnerability yourself to get things going as you're comfortable with it. Don't call on someone to participate because they may not be participating because they're not comfortable. In a break, you can ask them, would you like to share something with the group? It could be they're just one of those people who's like, I need to give everybody else their turn first. They don't want to take time. That one got out of order. So how do you tell a story? Well, there's a specific structure and arc to stories. You need to evoke some type of emotion. And when you're telling a story, especially if it's about yourself, you need to be authentic or people won't believe it. So you want to hook the listener immediately. And this is if you're speaking in front of a group of people, either with a really shocking fact, some type of problem that they could relate to, something that's really intriguing, or a question. One really effective way to start a presentation, and it's recommended that you start presentations with a story to draw people in. But, going up to the front and raising your hand and saying, has anyone else felt like this or experienced this? Start with a question to bring people in. Again, there is an arc to a story. There's characters, and you need to describe those characters. This is the textbook Freytag's pyramid, but some of the key elements of the story. There's a beginning where you introduce the characters, even if it's yourself and some other people. The setting, and a good story has some type of conflict. Okay, there's a middle. You escalate tension or challenge. You present some challenges or dilemmas. And then the climax is the moment of transformation, and then your resolution or takeaway message. Okay. So there's some elements of building the tension. Let's see. Use really vivid details. Here's an example. Instead of saying, I was nervous when I went up in front of that group to talk about something, my mouth went dry as I approached the podium. Think about the emotion you want people to feel, and say things that will evoke some type of emotion, because that makes it more memorable and it helps them identify more. Your story should have a purpose. I want them to leave understanding this. I want them leaving understanding how important this is. Okay. So the 3 takeaways for stories, they can be effective to enhance learning, develop connection, empathy, to change attitudes. Eliciting must be done with sensitivity, and telling a compelling story requires structure, emotion, and authenticity. So that's the end of storytelling. Some of you, I don't have all of the class projects for all of you. Some of you may want to get up and tell a story because you've never done that before. Using that arc. And again, this is your opportunity to practice here and now, not when you're on the job. That's what this is for.
We just-
Or you can tell me.